Well, before we get to the good news, I have some good news for you guys today. By the next time I get to preach on a Sunday morning, this will be trimmed to a manageable, reasonable length. The play that I am going to be in will happen between now and then. I appreciate your guys' patience and love and support, and not saying too much about it for the last 6, 7, 8 months. You guys have been awesome. So I just wanted you guys to know this is it. This is the last time, so enjoy it today. Although I will be teaching a couple Bible classes between now and then, so you'll get a couple of shots to enjoy it some more. But super glad to be here today. As we move into the lesson, let's go ahead and begin with a parable. Hear the parable of the prince and the pauper. The kingdom of heaven is like a prince who met a pauper. The impoverished beggar was stinky and dirty, homeless and helpless, ignorant and uneducated, incompetent and powerless, purposeless and hopeless. The pauper begged, "Can you spare a penny?" The prince, moved with pity and compassion, said, "A penny? I have so much more to give you than a penny. I have a job for you. You can be a servant in my kingdom. My other servants will clean and bathe you. My cooks will feed you so that you can be strong. My doctors will heal you so that you can walk and work. My teachers will instruct you so that you can be successful. You will accomplish so many things as a servant within my kingdom." But the pauper said, "I don't want a job. Can you just spare a penny?" And the prince went away sad because he had great possessions and power and purpose to give, but he could not. Those who have ears to hear, let them hear. While you process that parable, let's ask a question. Have you ever met my prince, my king? Have you ever met Jesus? This week, we are going to be involved in our Vacation Bible School. It'll start tonight at 5 o'clock. We'll have sessions tomorrow morning, Tuesday morning, and Wednesday morning at 10 o'clock. And then it'll wrap up in our Wednesday evening class time at 7:30. We would love for you to be here for all of that. Each of the lessons that are going to be there from all the ages, and we do have a teen and adult class that will be meeting here, taught by various men in the congregation. In all of those lessons, we are going to be introduced to 4 men who met Jesus, and Jesus transformed their lives. I think it'll be productive for us to learn from these fellows and their experience with Jesus. But before we get into that, I want us to kick off today by just thinking about meeting Jesus and what that means. And I want to do that by taking a look at another parable, this time one that Jesus taught. In Luke chapter 6, verses 46 through 49, Jesus said, Luke chapter 6, verse 46 through 49, "Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and not do what I tell you? Everyone who comes to me and hears my words and does them, I will show you what he's like. He's like a man building a house who dug deep and laid the foundation on the rock. And when the flood rose, the stream broke against the house and could not shake it, because it had been well built. But the one who hears and does not do them is like a man who built a house on the ground without a foundation. When the stream broke against it, immediately it fell, and the ruin of that house was great." I'd like for us to spend just a few moments this morning thinking about what Jesus taught here in this parable and what it means for us today as we meet Jesus. Before we unpack this, would you bow with me in prayer, please? God, you are magnificent. You are our awesome Creator. We love you. We long for you. We want to be like you. And we're so thankful that you sent Jesus into the world to show what that would look like right here in this earth, in this life. We pray that we can see him and hear him and follow him and do what he says. Learn to live as he lived, and by the power of your kingdom that we might live right here. help us today to be a little bit more like Jesus than we were yesterday, and that tomorrow will be a little bit more like him again. And may we encourage one another and strengthen one another, and through Jesus have a victorious life that receives forgiveness and grows because of that grace. And then because we have that abundant life that he has offered, when this life is over, the abundance and the life continues. May we, Father, learn from Jesus, the smartest man who ever lived. It is in his name that we pray. Amen. I want to begin by making a point. The first point is not actually a point that is made in the parable itself, but it is the underlying point. We might call it the foundational point of this parable that Jesus tells about these two builders. Here's the point we need to understand. Guys, Jesus is the smartest person you'll ever meet. Jesus is the smartest person that you will ever meet. We often say he's the wisest person you'll ever meet, which is, of course, also true. But typically when we think about wisdom, we're thinking about something kind of ethereal and mystical and philosophical. Here's what I want you to know. Jesus is God. He's God in the flesh. As Paul says in Colossians chapter 1, he is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or rulers or dominions. All things were created by him and for him. In him the fullness of God dwelt in bodily form. Don't you know that when that guy is walking on the face of the earth and you meet him, you have just met the smartest person that has ever lived? And when we talk about him being the smartest person that has ever lived, understand that if he were here, if he were living in our world today, just as when he was living 2,000 years ago, when you met Jesus, you would not only be meeting the wisest and most thoughtful theologian, you would not only be meeting the most profound philosopher, you'd not only be meeting the greatest preacher and teacher of religious thought, you'd also meet the person who is the greatest biologist and chemist and physicist that could have ever lived. You would be meeting the person who could lead a country. You'd be meeting the person who could practice law and lead the Supreme Court. You'd be meeting the person that would know how to broker trade agreements and negotiate peace. You'd be meeting the person who would know how to cure cancer, who would know how to defeat diabetes. You'd be meeting the person that could teach calculus. You'd be meeting the person who all those formulas you had to memorize in school so that you could pass those math tests and those science tests, he knew those formulas before the guys who discovered them and formulated them. That's the guy you would be meeting. You'd be meeting the man who would know how to get the squirrel out of your attic, who would know how to fix your broken plumbing, who would know how to be a spouse and a parent, who would know how to design an airplane and build a bridge, and would know how to construct a house. When you meet Jesus, brothers and sisters, friends and neighbors, understand you are meeting the smartest person that ever lived. But you know, interestingly, in his intelligence, he didn't talk about a lot of that stuff. But understand what he talked about is smart. And when you meet the smartest person that ever lived, as we see in the parable that we've just read in Luke chapter 6, you need to know that you meet the person who knows how to build a life. When you have met Jesus, you meet the person who knows how to build your life. Here in this parable, Jesus says, everyone who comes to me and hears my words and does them, I'll show you what he's like. He's like a man building a house who dug deep and laid the foundation on the rock. And when a flood arose, the stream broke against that house and could not shake it because it had been well built. This parable is an analogy. It is not an allegory. If it were an allegory, we would try to take a look at each of the pieces of the parable and we would try to figure out, oh, here's what the wise man represents and here's what the house represents. And that's actually not what's happening here. What's happening here is an analogy. Jesus says, let me tell you about a guy. Here's a guy. guy or a woman who hears what I say and does it, let me tell you what that person's like. That person is like somebody who, when they're building a house, they dig deep, they find the foundation, they build the house, and when the rains and the floods came, that house stands. He says, when you see somebody who hears what I say and do what I say and does what I say, you're meeting somebody who knows how to do things. Just like when you meet a builder who knows, dig down to the rock and lay a foundation. He says that's the kind of person. We all know when we hear this story that Jesus tells about these two builders, we all know one of those guys is a smart builder and one of those guys is a dumb builder. And we know when the floods come. We know that the man who digs down and lays the foundation and builds his house, that's the guy who's smart, and that's the guy we want to be like. Am I right about that? Any of us want to be like the guy who said, I'm just going to build this house on the ground beside the river? I mean, we're all look at that guy, we're like, I don't want to be like that guy. That guy doesn't know how to build. But Jesus knows how to build a life. Jesus knows how to build your life. And that's exactly what this parable is telling us. Jesus knows how it can be done. But he doesn't actually teach us about building houses. He teaches us about relationships. He teaches us about priorities. He teaches us about stewardship and money. He teaches us about values. He teaches us about godliness. And in all of these things that he teaches, he's saying this right here is how to build a life. And he's the smartest person that ever lived. And don't you know that if we build our life the way the smartest person that ever lived tells us how to build our life, we're going to be building a pretty good life. But understand this from the parable. Jesus will not keep you from the flood. Jesus will not keep you from the flood. Notice, Jesus does not compare the person who digs down and lays the foundation and then builds his house to the man who does not build where floods ever happen. He doesn't compare him to the man who builds where floods never come. And he also does not compare him to a man who, when the flood comes, God just reaches down and lifts him up out and holds him up above it and then sets him back down after it's over. You see, as we take a look at these two builders in the parable, in the analogy, in the comparison, the foolish builder who just builds on the ground, he doesn't actually look all that foolish while he's building. We don't recognize his folly until the rains start falling and the stream starts rising and the river breaks its bounds and the neighborhood starts flooding. Then we know how foolish the builder was. But do you recognize the floods didn't come because the builder was foolish? The floods came because, guys, that's what floods do. They show up. And the foolish builder wasn't ready. Now, as we look at the wise builder, the one who digs down and finds the bedrock and lays the foundation and builds up his house, while he's building, he doesn't necessarily look any wiser than any other builder. We don't actually realize how wise that builder is until the rains start to fall and the river starts to rise and it breaks from its bounds and the neighborhood starts to flood. Then we see how wise the wise builder is. Because his house, being well built, is not shaken. But understand that the floods don't keep from coming because he built wisely. Rather, the flood comes because, guys, that's what floods do. Floods come. And as we take a look at what Jesus tells in this story, he does not say, wise builders, escape the flood and I'll keep them from it. And foolish builders, face the flood. He doesn't say that. The flood hits both builders. Understand this. Please grasp this. Jesus does not keep you from the flood. But Jesus does know how to build a flood-proof life. Jesus will teach you how to build a flood-proof life. And yes, I have no doubt that part of this is what we might call just the normal storms of life that everybody faces, and He can teach us how to get through those. But I really do think that as we hear about this flood, we're supposed to think about another flood that we've all heard of. Do y'all remember a flood? A big flood? The flood that we find back in Genesis chapter 6 of the Hebrew Scriptures, where God, having recognized that all the thoughts of man were only evil, continually decided that He was going to start over. And what He did was He sent a flood on the earth, but there was one man who found favor with God, Noah. And God said to Noah, He did not say to Noah, listen, Noah, you found favor with me. You've met the qualifications. You've met the conditions. So here's what I'm going to do. When the flood hits, I'm just going to lift you and your family, and I'm just going to hold you up in the air for a while. And when it's done, I'll put you back down. That's not what He said. What He said to Noah was, Noah, I'm done. I'm starting over, but I'll start over with you. And you need to be ready. You need to prepare. You need to build a house. Actually, you need to build a house box or a house boat that you're going to be living in for a while. And you need to make it big because you may not be an animal guy, but you're going to have a bunch of pets for a while. And you need to build this boat the way I have said to build this boat. And if you build this boat the way I'm telling you to build the boat, then when the flood comes, you'll be prepared. Please understand the difference as we take a look at Jesus' parable of the wise and the foolish builder. He does not provide for us the conditions or the qualifications by which we will be rescued from the flood. When we think in terms of conditions and qualifications, what we tend to do is dicker and barter with God about what the qualifications and conditions are. Okay, God, if you're going to rescue me from the flood at the end, I get it. Here's the list of qualifications. I mean, do I really have to do all of them? What if I did 90% of them? Would that be good enough? Would that be okay? What if I did 75% of them? What if I did 51% of them? I mean, that's doing more of them than I'm not doing. That's more than half, right? Hey, God, what if I actually do more of them than that guy over there? That'll be good enough, right? What if I do more of them than anybody else you know? That'll be good enough. Guys, can you imagine Noah saying to God, all right, I know you want me to cover this boat with pitch, but I mean, like, would 90% of the boat being covered with pitch be okay? What if I just do the bottom half, Lord? That's the part that's going to be in the water. Would that be okay? Would that be enough? That makes no sense, does it? Because when I start thinking about what He's doing is preparing me for the flood, then the question is, how much of this teaching of Jesus do I want to do and do I want to follow? The question then becomes, I don't know. How much of the flood do you want to be prepared for? Now, I want to share something with you that's not in the outline, that will be on the black tables in the back if you want to pick it up afterwards. I was talking about this with somebody the other day, and he asked a question, so I want to share this. I get it. I understand. I'm not saying that the only way you'll be prepared is if you actually make it to 100% and better than everybody else. I know that. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But if what you do is settle for 90%, that's a different story. If what you do is say, I think 90% is good enough, so I'm just going to hang out here at 90%, that's not the way to do it. Do you want to be prepared for the flood? Then whatever you're learning from Jesus, go do that thing. And you'll be prepared for the flood. Jesus won't take you out of the flood. He won't keep you from the flood. But understand, my brothers and sisters and friends and neighbors, Jesus will teach you how to build a flood-proof life. He will teach you how to be prepared for the flood. But understand this. Jesus is too smart to be manipulated or tricked. Here in Luke's version of this teaching, he begins with, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and not do what I tell you? We can't manipulate him by calling him Lord. Oh, but I called you Lord. I've made you Lord of my life. Isn't that enough? If I believe that Jesus is Lord and confess that Jesus is Lord, will that be enough to be prepared for the flood? No. Guys, you realize it doesn't work like that in any other walk of life? Think about this. If I want to win a singing competition, will it be enough for me to believe that John Bassett and Tim Moore are amazing, excellent vocal instructors? Will it be enough for me to confess to the world and everyone that John Bassett and Tim Moore are excellent vocal instructors? Because, man, if it would be, I'm about to win, because I believe that. I am confessing that. But you know full well I'm not going to go out of here and win any vocal competitions. Because if what I want to do is win the singing competition, I actually have to go to them, I have to listen to them, and then guess what? I have to actually do what they say. And I know that Tim or John are saying, if only all the students would. Am I right, brother? If only they would. I actually have to do what they say if I want to win. It doesn't work like this in any other aspect of life. Why would we think that when it comes to flood preparation, that the only thing I have to do is believe that Jesus is the smartest man who ever lived and confess that I believe that? The issue here is it's actually not about how smart Jesus is and him not being manipulated and tricked. This is just the natural order of things. Think about this. If I were building a house along the side of a river, and I received instruction from the smartest builder who ever constructed a house, who had built so many houses that had faced floods and they stood and withstood the flood, would it be enough for me to simply tell everybody, hey, that builder over there, he's the smartest builder that ever lived? Would it be enough for me to go tell him, I think you're the smartest builder that ever lived? Of course not. What would I have to do? I'd actually have to build the house the way he tells me to build the house. I have to go to him. I have to listen to him. I have to do what he says. Otherwise, the rains are going to fall, the river's going to rise, it's going to break forth from its bounds, it's going to hit my house, and it's going to break my house, and great will the ruin be. That's just the way it works. But someone will say, well, but with Jesus it's different. It's different because we will never perfectly do all that Jesus says. And so all that matters is that we believe that he's the smartest one and that we confess that he's the smartest one. Obviously, we're not ever going to perfectly do what Jesus says, which is part of the reason that Jesus tells us about how to handle it when we don't perfectly live the way Jesus says. And the great news is that when we hear what Jesus says and we do what Jesus says and we build as Jesus builds, God is building with us and our building matters. But please understand this. It's not just, I'm going to call Jesus Lord. Am I going to do what he says? And so let's meet Jesus, the smartest person who ever lived. It is fantastic. Wouldn't it be great to meet the smartest person that ever lived? Wouldn't you love to meet the smartest person that ever lived? But meeting the smartest person that ever lived will only do you good if you let meeting him transform you and change you. And so we come back to the story that Jesus told. And right there in that story, right at the very beginning, he tells us how meeting him will do us any good. It's three things, 3 steps. 3 steps. Not always easy steps, but very simple steps. He says, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and not do what I tell you? Everyone who comes to me. If we want Jesus to do us any bit of good, we have to come to Jesus. We need to come to Jesus. We need to meet Jesus. We need to turn to Jesus. But not just come to him, we need to hear His words. We need to listen to what He says. We need to open up and see the words that He has revealed and read them and know them and let them get into our hearts and minds. And then, well, we need to do them. We need to do them. Will we do them perfectly? Of course not. But we need to do them. We need to obey. We need to submit. We need to follow. We need to surrender. Guys, that's what discipleship is. Discipleship is saying, Jesus is the smartest person who ever lived. He's the one who knows how to live this life. I'm going to start right now living this life the way He would live it because He knows how it's done. And He knows the way that this life can be the most victorious, not because it'll make me wealthy, not because it'll make me healthy, but because one day the flood is coming. And when that flood hits, I want to be ready by His grace, by His power, by His teaching, by His strength. Not having done all these things my own way and expecting Him just to take up my slack at the end. Brothers and sisters, friends and neighbors, I almost named this sermon, He's Only Your Lord When You Let Him Lead. And that's the thing we got to grasp. Will we follow Him perfectly? No, I know we won't. I know we won't. But will you follow Him? Will you listen to Him? Will you do what He says? And tomorrow, will you do it again? And when you mess up, will you come back and start doing it again? Because Jesus is the smartest person you'll ever meet. He is the smartest person that you'll ever meet. And He knows how to build your life. How are you doing at that? If you'd like to, you can put your Bibles and your notes away. We're going to sing a song. It's a song that we often refer to as an invitation song because what we are doing is inviting you to meet Jesus. We're inviting you to meet Jesus. We're inviting you to listen to Jesus. We're inviting you to do what Jesus says. You'll stumble, you'll fall, you'll mess up. I know it. Jesus knows it. He died for you because He knows that. But He rose to be your King. And He has so much to offer you. Please don't just ask for a penny. Before Jesus left the earth, He said to His disciples, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me," Jesus. "Go into all the world and make disciples, baptizing them, immersing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Spirit, teaching them to observe, to listen and do all that I've commanded. And lo, I am with you always, even till the end of the age," even until the flood, the judgment. Even until and through the rivers rising and beating against the life that you have built. He said, "I'll be with you." Will you let Jesus lead and build your life? If we can help you with that today, won't you please come to the front right now as we stand and sing?